We write and read music, and overview highlighting some of the problems we have with the many different ways we can write down and read musical information, setting the stage for a new way, a new system. First, we're just going to list out some of the standard ways that we can write down and read musical information, that being our songs, our melodies, our tunes. Then we'll go over some of them in a bit more detail, expanding on some of the basic problems with those systems. In future presentations, we'll go into some of those problems in more detail and then propose a system that might solve some of these problems. So we have the big picture here, the current system for music notations. How can we write down, how can we read our musical ideas? Well, we've got the staff notation. That's going to be the classical kind of format of writing down our musical ideas. Sheet music, the classical standard. We've got tablature or just tab, guitar-focused shorthand. We've got lead sheets, melody plus chord symbols for jazz and pop. We've got chord charts, chords only for singers and bands. We've got a Nashville number system, relative chords for transposition. Then we have the DAWs and the MIDIs, which use kind of a piano roll or digital sequencing kind of system. Then we have other software tab notation. We've got Guitar Pro and so on and so forth. So all of these systems have their pros and cons, but there are some problems that kind of roll through all of the different systems. And it would be nice if we can put something together that addresses some of the pros and cons in a more systematic format. So let's look at some of these in more detail, including the standard, the staff notation, basically the sheet music type of format. So it's universal for classic traditional music. If you learned to play as a child, you probably started on the piano because the piano is the baseline instrument for Western music. It's kind of like the computer of Western music. So that means that Western music has been designed in essence around the piano, and the way we write down that information, that musical ideas, is typically going to be with the sheet music. So notice the music kind of took off when you had basically an orchestra happening, where you have all these different kind of instruments happening. But you can imagine the person composing, writing the music is probably doing it with a piano, because that's the one that we have the most capacity to play both the melody as well as chords, for example. So we have exact pitches, rhythm, dynamics. Now remember, in a time frame where you have an orchestra, the orchestra was the big idea, the big thing, the most modern, cool stuff. Why? Because now you can stack chords with different harmonics. So obviously there was a push to have bigger and bigger sets of instruments, which is going to give you more different opportunities to stack chords in different ways. And the emphasis is going to move from something like an improviser of the musician, like in a jazz type of setting, to the expertise of the composer, so that the person playing, the whole giant organization, has to somehow get together and play all of that stuff, at the same time. That's kind of the challenge. Notice today, that's not so much the challenge. Why? Because although orchestras are still super cool, now we have technical capacity to stack music ourselves. So a lot of what people are doing with really complex music isn't trying to get a bunch of different instruments together to play at the same time, stacking different notes on top of each other, building chords with different instruments, but rather stacking their own music or stacking musical information together in like a software. So you can see there's a different emphasis just in the nature of the way things are. The drive in today's world isn't to have the bigger and bigger orchestra. Some people might still have that drive, but that's not the most modern thing because of the technology now. The drive now is to master the stacking of musical information in creative ways generally, right? That's how I see it, at least. So pros, the sheet music is precise, detailed, and it's standardized. The cons, it's a complex system, piano-centric, and it's hard to follow. So obviously, the system is using symbols that are almost look like they're designed to be confusing. They used sharps and flats, which are really something that only have any utility on a piano, because really on any other instrument, you don't really think in sharps and flats, or it's not really as useful to do so because the piano has different fingering for different sharps and flats that are going to be within the system. So again, it's kind of designed off of the piano. Also, a lot of the symbols aren't very nice or user-friendly for digital type of software, which is what we're typically going to be using in today's world. So you got something like this that you can basically write the song from. So then we have a tablature. Now, tablature is going to be specific to a guitar. So note, these days, it would be kind of nice to have information that's specific to a particular instrument. You still want to have some flexibility. We've got this trade-off of I want it to be universal for all musicians versus I want something that's specific for my particular instrument, because that's going to make it easier for me to specialize and learn my particular instrument. These are one of the trade-offs that we have here. So obviously the tab is going to be specific for guitar. Guitar-specific grid of frets and strings. The pros, it's simple for riffs and solos. The cons, upside-down layout, hard to show advanced chords, non-transferable to to instruments. So in other words, even the tablature, I think they kind of tried to copy the sheet music because they wanted it to go from low to high pitch, even though the easiest way to look at the music, you would think, would be as though you're looking into a mirror having the low or heavy E string on top. So even the stuff that's designed to be specific to the guitar, I feel like has been influenced by basically the piano and tablature and isn't as user-friendly as it could be, right? We could make it nicer for the eye of the guitar player. Plus, it has a similar problem of the stacking problem because you don't usually put chords in this kind of layout. So it's great for the melody, but if you have a chord, you'd have to stack the chords. So you can have 3 notes on a particular line, which is a little bit more complex than just saying, here's the chord name, right? And that's one of the standard problems. So here's something like the tablature. You've got like the heavy E string on the bottom, so it's still kind of rising up in pitch, even though a guitar goes down in pitch. It goes from the low E down. So lead sheets. So lead sheets, melody line plus chord symbols. Lyrics are optional. So this is an attempt to get everything in one place. The pros, flexible, compact, universal for ensembles. The cons, vague rhythms, ear dependent, not digital native. So some of the problems with the shorthand kind of information is that it might not be as specific as sheet music. Now there's pros and cons to that, of course, because if you're a jazz musician or a rock star, improvising is part of the system. So you want to have some improv in there. Whereas if you're in an orchestra, then you still have some kind of dynamics, but it's usually driven by the person that's directing the orchestra in terms of what the variation might be from the actual sheet music, right? Might be small variations in pitch or timing and so on and so forth. But the problem is that you would like to have some ability to vary the specificness of what you're writing down. So if something's really specific and I want it to be specific, I'd like the capacity to do that. And if I want to provide more leeway, I'd like the capacity to do that as well. And so it would be nice if we had one kind of system that gave us a little bit more leeway for both of those things to take place, or to vary or adjust the dial between the two of them. So we have chord charts. So chords only, sometimes with lyrics. So we've got pros are going to be quick, simple, easy for bands. Cons, no melody, no rhythm, and detail. So chord charts, kind of like a thesaurus, for guitarists. Even the chord charts, once again, I don't think are specific or as well designed as they could be because they're designed with the heavy string on the bottom or in this vertical format, which I think is an attempt to get the heavy string a little closer to the top, as most people would visualize it, as they are from behind the guitar. But I still think that's influenced from traditional piano concept, where you want the notes rising in pitch. Even though, again, on a guitar, you have the lowest or heaviest pitched string on the top, and then it goes higher in pitch as you go down towards the floor. on the guitar. It would be better to map that when you're actually trying to finger as though you're looking into a mirror. Nashville number system. So we have numbers instead of chord names. Now, I've been using the Nashville number system to mean different things, but the classical idea of the Nashville number system is just to say, hey, look, when I name chords, I'm not going to basically name them as a C major and an A minor and so on and so forth. I'm just going to say the relative position of the chords in relation to the scale. So that's great, but most of the time we're going to be playing in a major or the minor. It flips between a major and minor quite well, but it doesn't always flip too well or transpose to the other modalities. Now, I've been using the idea of the Nashville number system to keep the numbers permanent, which I would say is more of what some people are doing, but I would call it a modal-based system. Now, that's going to be one of the keys that I think will solve a lot of these problems, opening up the ability to transpose automatically, not just between the major and minor, but between all of the keys without having to rewrite everything, which would be highly useful. It just seems clear that that would be the way to go. Now, then you've got DAWs and MIDI rules. So they look something like this, and they're going to be similar to sheet music in that we have a whole list of the notes, 12 notes in an octave, and we can stack those notes. That's great, but you end up with a very long and sheet of music, right? Whereas it would be great if you can compact all of this stuff down to like one row representing one octave and be able to stack the chords with basic chord names, simplifying the way that you're viewing things. So the pros and cons here, we've got the notes shown on a grid. So the pros, it's powerful, editable, digital native. That's great. Cons, still stacks chords vertically, tied to piano layout, no simple chord modules. So when I say tied to piano, notice we're looking here at the guy typing a piano to put it into the system. Now, it's possible not to use a piano. You could use basically a mouse. But when you're doing the data input into the system and you want to use like a keyboard, it's not going to be a typewriter typically, but they want the piano keyboard even if you have a MIDI type of system. That's not optimal. The piano is great. The piano is the computer of music back before we had computers, but it introduces a whole bunch of problems that you don't really need to have if you're not a piano player, right? So if you're picking up the DAW, it would be a lot easier if your data input was just the 10 key, like a 10 key for a calculator. That would be an easy system, or just assign the notes to the keyboard. That would be better than the piano because then you can just number the notes. We'll talk about that later. But it looks something like this. You get the stacked information. These are 12 notes on the left-hand side. So if I wrote something like in the middle of the piano, then it would have to be this large stacked information right here. And if I have a chord, it has 3 notes that are stacked on top of each other instead of just saying, hey, look, that's a C major chord, or C major triad. What would be nice if I can condense this entire thing down to one row that could represent either chords or singular notes. And that would be a lot cleaner